Richard had built his life brick by brick. Starting from a small apartment with nothing but a laptop and a dream, he'd turned his software company into something real. Now, at 42, he lived in a house with a garden, drove a nice car, and had a wife who turned heads whenever they walked into a room together. Catherine was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her dark hair always fell perfectly over her shoulders, and she had this way of smiling that made people want to be around her. They'd met at a charity event 9 years ago. She'd been volunteering, helping organize the silent auction, and Richard had been immediately drawn to her warmth and energy. 6 months later, they were married. The first few years had been good. Really good? They'd travel on weekends, laugh over dinner, stay up late talking about their dreams. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Not in an obvious way. Not with fights or slammed doors. It was quieter than that. Catherine started spending more time with her friends. Richard buried himself in work. They still lived in the same house, still slept in the same bed, but something essential had shifted. Richard told himself this was normal. All marriages went through phases, right? The butterflies couldn't last forever. What mattered was commitment, partnership, building a life together. And on the surface, they had that. Catherine managed their social life beautifully, hosting dinner parties that everyone talked about for weeks. Their home was always spotless, always welcoming. To anyone looking from the outside, they were the perfect couple. Maria had been cleaning their house for 5 years now. She came 3 times a week, arriving early in the morning and working quietly through the rooms. Richard barely noticed her most days. She was just part of the routine, like the gardener who came on Tuesdays or the pool guy on Fridays. But Maria noticed everything. She noticed because that was her job. You couldn't clean someone's house for 5 years without learning their patterns, their habits, their secrets. She knew Richard liked his coffee black and strong. She knew Catherine changed the sheets on their bed more often when Richard traveled for business. She knew which rooms felt warm and which ones felt cold. Even with the heat on. Maria was 53, originally from Guatemala, and she'd been cleaning houses in America for 28 years. She'd raised 3 kids on those wages, put 2 through college, and learned long ago that keeping quiet kept you employed. Rich people didn't want to know that you noticed things. They wanted you invisible, efficient, silent, but lately Maria had been noticing things that bothered her. Small things at first. Catherine's phone was always face down now. She'd get text messages and her whole face would change, a little smile, a brightness in her eyes, and then she'd glance around to see. If anyone was watching before quickly typing back, then there were the afternoon absences. Catherine had joined a yoga studio, or so she said. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, she'd leave the house in expensive workout clothes, her hair and makeup done perfectly. Who wore that much makeup to yoga? Maria had done yoga at the community center. People showed up in old t-shirts with their hair in messy buns and the credit card statements. Maria didn't mean to look, but she'd been dusting the office when one was sitting open on the desk. Restaurants she'd never heard Catherine mention. A hotel charge from 2 months ago when Richard had been in Seattle for a conference. Purchases from men's stores, cologne, watches, leather goods. Catherine always said she bought Richard's gifts herself, but Richard never wore any of those items. Maria kept cleaning, kept quiet. It wasn't her place to say anything. She'd seen this before in other houses. Rich people's problems were their own. She'd learned that lesson the hard way years ago when she tried to warn another employer about similar signs. She'd been fired the next day, accused of being nosy and unprofessional. She had bills to pay, grandkids to help support. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but Richard was different from other employers. He actually looked at her when he spoke to her. He'd asked about her family, remembered her daughter's name, given her a generous bonus last Christmas without being asked. When her son had been in the hospital 2 years ago, Richard had told her to take all the time she needed and still paid her in full. Catherine, on the other hand, treated her like furniture. She'd talk on the phone as if Maria wasn't there, discussing private things, intimate details about friends and family. She'd leave messes and expect them to disappear. She never said thank you. To Catherine, Maria was a service, not a person. One Thursday evening, Maria was finishing up in the kitchen when Richard came home early. He looked exhausted, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. He dropped his briefcase by the door and rubbed his face. "Long day, Mr. Richard?" Maria asked, putting away the last of the dishes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The longest. We're closing a deal that should have been done weeks ago, but the other company keeps adding conditions. I've got another late night tomorrow to finalize everything." Catherine appeared from upstairs, dressed for an evening out. "Oh, good, you're home," she said to Richard, though her tone suggested she'd hoped otherwise. "I'm meeting Jennifer and the girls for dinner. Don't wait up." She kissed his cheek, grabbed her purse, and was gone before Richard could respond. He stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, something sad flickering across his face. "Can I make you something to eat, Mr. Richard?" Maria offered quietly. "No, thank you, Maria. I'll just heat up leftovers." "You should head home. It's late." Maria gathered her things, but as she walked to her car, she felt that familiar knot in her stomach. The same one she'd felt in that other house, years ago, before everything fell apart for that family. The next morning, Friday, Maria arrived to find Catherine in an unusually good mood. She was humming while making coffee, her face bright with an excitement that Maria hadn't seen in years. She wore a dress that seemed too fancy for a day at home, and she'd spent over an hour on her hair and makeup. "Maria, I'll be out most of the afternoon," Catherine said, checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. "Richard's working from home today. His schedule changed. Make sure the house is perfect, okay?" There was something in her voice, an edge, an electricity. Maria had heard that tone before in other houses with other wives. It was the sound of someone with a secret, someone walking toward something they knew was wrong but couldn't stop themselves from doing. Maria nodded and started her work, but her mind was elsewhere. She moved through the rooms mechanically, dusting, vacuuming, straightening. When she came back to the kitchen, Catherine was at the blender, carefully measuring out ingredients for a smoothie. But it wasn't her usual routine. She kept glancing at the doorway, making sure she was alone. Maria watched from the hallway, staying out of sight. Catherine pulled a small container from her designer purse, something Maria had never seen before, and carefully added its contents to the blender. She mixed it all together, poured it into a glass, and placed it in the refrigerator. Then she wrote a note on expensive stationery and tucked it under the glass. When Catherine finally left 20 minutes later, practically floating out the door, Maria stood in the kitchen staring at that refrigerator. Every instinct she'd developed over nearly 3 decades told her something was very wrong. She opened the door and read the note. "Drink me when you get tired, my love. You've been working so hard." The words seemed sweet, but Maria's hands were shaking. She thought about that strange container, the secretive way Catherine had added it, the happiness on her face as she'd left. She thought about all the signs she'd noticed over the past months, all the pieces that suddenly seemed to fit together into a picture. She didn't want to see. Maria closed the refrigerator and pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over Richard's contact information, the number he'd given her for emergencies. Was this an emergency? Or was she just a paranoid old woman seeing danger where there was none? If she was wrong, she'd lose everything. Her job, her reputation, her livelihood. But if she was right, and she stayed silent. She heard footsteps upstairs. Richard was coming down for lunch. Maria made a decision. Whatever happened next, she'd have to live with it. But she'd rather lose her job than lose her conscience. Some things mattered more than staying invisible. Richard's footsteps grew louder as he descended the stairs. Maria stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The glass sat in the refrigerator, innocent-looking, with that sweet note attached. In a few seconds, Richard would walk through that door, tired and hungry, and he'd see his wife's thoughtful gesture. "Maria, are you still here?" Richard called out as he entered the kitchen. He was wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, his hair messy from running his hands through it. His eyes had dark circles underneath. The man looked exhausted. "Yes, Mr. Richard, I was just finishing the kitchen." Her voice came out steady. But her hands trembled as she held the dish towel. Richard walked straight to the refrigerator and pulled it open. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She watched him scan the shelves, and then his face softened when he spotted the glass with the note. He reached for it. Every muscle in Maria's body tensed. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. What if she was wrong? What if Catherine had just made a healthy smoothie with some new supplement? Rich people were always trying weird health trends. Activated charcoal, strange powders, expensive vitamins. Maybe that's all this was. Richard held the glass, reading the note, a small smile forming on his tired face. That's sweet of her, he murmured, more to himself than to Maria. He was about to drink it. Mr. Richard. The words burst from Maria before she could stop them. Wait, please. He paused, the glass halfway to his lips, and looked at her with surprise. What's wrong, Maria? Now she'd done it. She'd opened her mouth, and there was no going back. Her mind raced. How could she explain without sounding crazy? Without destroying this man's marriage? Without losing her job? The kitchen isn't finished, she stammered. I still need to wipe down the counters. Could you maybe drink that later? After I'm done? It was weak, and she knew it. Richard looked at her with confusion, then glanced around the spotless kitchen. Every surface gleamed. There was nothing left to clean. Maria, the kitchen looks perfect. It always does. He studied her face more carefully now. Are you okay? You seem upset. She wasn't a good liar. Never had been? Her daughter always said her face gave everything away. And right now, standing in this kitchen with this kind man about to drink something that every instinct told her was dangerous, she couldn't pretend anymore. Mr. Richard, please sit down. I need to tell you something, and you're not going to want to hear it. The confusion on his face deepened, but he set the glass on the counter and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. All right. I'm sitting. What's going on? Maria sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd worked in enough houses to know that what she was about to do could ruin her life. But she thought about her own husband, God rest his soul, and how she would have wanted someone to warn him if he'd been in danger. I've been working here for 5 years, she began slowly. And in that time, I've learned to keep my eyes down and my mouth shut. That's how you keep a job like this. But lately, I've been seeing things that worry me. Things about Mrs. Catherine. Richard's expression changed immediately. His jaw tightened and his eyes grew guarded. What kind of things? Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Over the past few weeks, she'd started taking pictures, not really knowing why, just following an instinct that told her something was wrong. She showed him the first one, a photo of the credit card statement she'd seen on the desk. I wasn't snooping, she said quickly. It was just there, and I saw these charges. Restaurants when you were traveling, hotels, stores that sell men's things, but you never wear any of those gifts. Richard stared at the photo, his face growing pale. He took the phone from her hands and zoomed in on the dates, the amounts, the locations. She watched him process it all, saw the exact moment when denial cracked and reality started seeping in. There's more, Maria said quietly. She scrolled to the next photos. She'd taken them carefully, secretly, over the past 3 weeks. Catherine meeting a man at a cafe downtown. The two of them walking into a hotel together. Catherine laughing at something he said, her hand on his arm, looking happier than Maria had ever seen her look with Richard. The man in the photos was younger than Richard, maybe in his mid-30s. He wore expensive clothes, but something about him seemed off. His smile didn't reach his eyes. In one photo, he was checking his phone while Catherine gazed at him adoringly, and there was something calculating in his expression. Richard sat very still, staring at the photos. He didn't say anything for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. How long have you known? I started noticing things about 2 months ago. The photos are from the last 3 weeks. Mr. Richard, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how, and I was afraid. Does everyone know? He interrupted. The gardener? The pool guy? The neighbors? No, Maria said firmly. I haven't told anyone. This isn't gossip to me. This is your life. He rubbed his face with both hands, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. But then he straightened up, and something harder settled into his features. Why are you telling me now? Why today? This was it. The moment where she either committed fully or backed away. Maria took a deep breath. This morning Mrs. Catherine made that smoothie. I saw her do it. She was acting strange, nervous, excited. She kept checking to make sure no one was watching. And then she took out a small container from her purse, something I've never seen before, and she added it to the blender. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers. What kind of container? Small dark glass, no label. She was very careful with it. Very secretive. And then she left the house looking happier than I've seen her in months. Mr. Richard, I've been cleaning houses for 28 years. I've seen a lot of things. And my gut is telling me something is very wrong with that drink. Richard stood up abruptly and walked to the counter where the glass sat. He stared at it like it was a snake coiled and ready to strike. His hand hovered over it but didn't touch it. You think she's trying to poison me, he said flatly. I think something is not right. Maybe it's just sleeping pills. Maybe she wanted you to sleep so she could go out. Or maybe... Maria couldn't finish the sentence. It sounded too much like a TV show, too dramatic to be real. But real life was sometimes more dramatic than any show. Richard picked up his phone and started typing. I'm calling my lawyer. And the police. Mr. Richard, wait, Maria said, fear flooding through her. What if I'm wrong? What if it's nothing? You'll destroy your marriage over my paranoia. He turned to look at her and his eyes were cold now, focused. Maria, I've been a fool. I've ignored every sign, every gut feeling, because I didn't want to see the truth. I told myself we were just going through a rough patch, that all marriages have problems. But you know what? My wife doesn't make me smoothies, ever. She doesn't leave me sweet notes. We barely talk anymore. So why today? Why this drink? Why right before she runs off to meet her boyfriend? He scrolled through his own phone now, checking his calendar, his messages. I told her yesterday that I'd be working late tonight. That changed this morning when the meeting got canceled. I'm supposed to be at the office right now. She thinks I'm not home. The pieces were falling into place and Maria could see it happening in real time. Richard's face went from confused to angry to something darker, afraid. If you're right, he said slowly, if there's something in that drink. And I'd taken even one sip. He couldn't finish the thought. Maria stood up and walked over to him. Mr. Richard, I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know anything for certain, but I know that I'd rather be wrong and embarrassed than stay quiet and have something happen to you. You've been good to me, to my family. You treated me like a person. I couldn't let you drink that without saying something. Richard looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in 5 years. Thank you, Maria. You might have just saved my life. He picked up the glass carefully, using a kitchen towel to avoid touching it directly. Don't clean anything else. Don't touch anything. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I want to know exactly what's in this drink. I want to know what my wife was planning. Maria nodded, her whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She'd done it. She'd spoken up. Whatever happened next, she could live with herself. Richard made the call. Within minutes, everything would change. The police were coming. His lawyer was coming. The perfect life he thought he had was about to shatter into a million pieces, but at least he'd be alive to pick up those pieces. As they waited, Richard sat back down at the table, staring at nothing. 9 years, he said quietly. We've been married for 9 years. How did I not see this? Maria sat with him in silence. She didn't have an answer. She just knew that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we see the least clearly. And sometimes it takes an outsider, someone watching from the edges, to see the truth that's been hiding in plain sight all along. The first police car arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers, one older with gray at his temples, one younger who couldn't have been more than 25. They walked through Richard's front door like they'd done this 1,000 times before, calm and professional, but Maria could see the curiosity in their eyes. "This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where they usually got called, Mr. Bennett," the older officer said, extending his hand. "I'm Officer Davis. This is Officer Chun. You said something about a suspicious substance?" Richard led them to the kitchen where the glass still sat on the counter, now covered with a clean towel. He explained everything: Catherine's affair, the strange behavior that morning, Maria's observations, the mysterious container. His voice stayed steady, but Maria noticed his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Officer Davis listened without interrupting, taking notes. When Richard finished, the officer looked at the glass, then at Maria. "Ma'am, you saw Mrs. Bennett add something to this drink?" Maria nodded. "Yes, sir. A small dark bottle, no label. She was very secretive about it. I've never seen it before in this house." "And you're certain about the affair?" Officer Chun asked Richard. Richard pulled out his phone and showed them the photos Maria had taken. The officers looked at each other, and something unspoken passed between them. They'd seen this before, Maria realized. Maybe not exactly this, but something close enough. "We need to take that glass in for testing," Officer Davis said. "But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Bennett. Even if there's something in there, proving intent is complicated." She could say it was medication, supplements, something innocent. "Unless we have more evidence, I want to press charges," Richard interrupted. "Whatever you find, I want to know about it. And I want my wife questioned. Do you know where she is right now?" Richard checked his phone. "She told Maria she'd be out all afternoon. I can try to find out where she went, but she knows something's up if I start asking questions." Officer Davis thought for a moment. "Don't contact her yet. Let us run the tests first. If there's something dangerous in that drink, we'll bring her in for questioning. In the meantime, I'd suggest you stay somewhere else tonight. Maybe a hotel, a friend's place." "This is my house," Richard said, his jaw tight. "I understand. But if your wife comes home and realizes you didn't drink that smoothie, and that the police were here, we don't know how she might react." "Better safe than sorry." Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but Maria saw the fight go out of him. He was exhausted, emotionally drained. Everything he'd believed about his life had collapsed in less than an hour. The officers left with the glass carefully bagged as evidence. Richard's lawyer arrived 10 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia who'd helped him with business deals over the years. She sat with him in the living room, asking questions, taking notes, explaining what would happen next. Maria stayed in the kitchen, unsure whether she should leave or stay. She felt like she was intruding on something too private, too painful. But Richard had asked her to wait, so she did. Around 3 in the afternoon, Richard's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "Having a wonderful afternoon. Don't wait up for dinner. See you late tonight. Love you." Richard showed the message to Patricia, his face unreadable. "Love you," he repeated bitterly. She signs off with "love you" while I'm sitting here wondering if she tried to kill me. Patricia leaned forward. "Richard, I need you to stay calm. I know this is hell, but we have to be smart. Don't respond to that text yet. Let her think everything is normal. The police need time to run their tests. How long will that take? For a basic tox screen? Maybe 24 to 48 hours. But if they find something suspicious, they can rush it. Could be as fast as a few hours if they prioritize it." Richard stood up and paced the room. "I can't just sit here. I can't pretend everything is fine while she's out there with him, probably laughing about how clever she thinks she is." "That's exactly what you need to do," Patricia said firmly. "You act normal. You go about your business. You give them no reason to suspect that you know anything. Because if she realizes we're onto her, she'll lawyer up immediately, and this becomes 10 times harder to prove." Maria watched from the kitchen doorway. She'd never seen Richard like this, angry, hurt, betrayed. The kind, tired man who'd come home yesterday was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd had their trust shattered. The call came at 5:30. Officer Davis, his voice serious. "Mr. Bennett, we need you to come down to the station. The preliminary results are back, and we need to talk." Richard drove himself, despite Patricia's offer to take him. Maria went home, finally, after Richard thanked her again and told her to take the next few days off with pay. She left feeling hollowed out, wondering if she'd done the right thing or if she'd just destroyed a family dot at the police station. Richard sat in a small room that smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. Officer Davis came in with a folder, his expression grim. "Mr. Bennett, what we found in that SMOOT? It's serious. There were prescription sedatives, a significant amount. We're talking about enough to knock out a horse. Mixed with your daily medication, you do take blood pressure medication, correct?" Richard nodded, his mouth dry. "Then yes, this could have been fatal. At minimum, it would have caused severe respiratory depression, possibly cardiac arrest, especially given your dosage of blood pressure meds. Whoever put this together knew what they were doing." The room seemed to tilt. Richard gripped the edge of the table. "So she really tried to kill me. We can't prove who put it in there yet. But given the evidence, we'd like to bring your wife in for questioning. Do you know where she is?" Richard checked his phone. "Another text from Catherine, sent 20 minutes ago. Just finished a wonderful dinner. Heading home soon. Hope you had a good day at work?" She thought he was at the office. She thought he'd be home by now, unconscious or worse. The realization made him feel sick. "I can call her," Richard said. "Tell her to come home, or you could go to wherever she is." Officer Davis shook his head. "We need to be careful about this. If we spook her, she could run. Do you have any idea who she's with? Where she might be?" Richard thought about the photos Maria had shown him. "There's a hotel downtown, the Riverside. They've met there before. And there's a restaurant called Bella Vita. I saw charges from there on their credit card." Officer Chun was already on his computer. "Got it. Bella Vita shows a reservation for 2 tonight under the name." He paused, reading the screen. "Trevor Walsh, that mean anything to you?" Richard shook his head. He didn't even know the man's name until now. Trevor Walsh, the man his wife had chosen over him. The man she was with right now, probably celebrating what they thought was the perfect crime. "We'll send units to both locations," Officer Davis said. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to understand something. When we bring your wife in, things are going to move fast. This becomes a criminal investigation. There's no taking it back, no changing your mind. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Richard looked at the folder on the table, at the test results that showed his wife had tried to kill him. He thought about 9 years of marriage, about the woman he'd loved, about how blind he'd been. And he thought about Maria, a woman he'd barely noticed for 5 years who'd risked everything to save his life. "I'm certain," he said. "Find her. Arrest her. I want to know why. I want to hear her try to explain how she could do this." Officer Davis nodded and stood up. "We'll bring her in. It might take a few hours, but we'll get her. In the meantime, stay here at the station. It's safer." Richard sat alone in that small room as officers mobilized around him. Somewhere out in the city, Catherine was finishing her dinner, probably holding hands with Trevor across the table, believing she'd gotten away with it. She had no idea that her perfect plan had fallen apart. Because of a housekeeper's intuition and a glass that never got drunk, his phone buzzed again. Another text from Catherine. "On my way home now. Can't wait to see you." Richard stared at those words until they blurred. Can't wait to see you? What did she expect to find when she got home? His body? An empty house? He'd never know what was going through her mind. What kind of person could write those words knowing what she'd done? He typed back. His hands steady now. "See you soon?" 20 minutes later, Officer Davis returned. "We've got her. Officers intercepted her car about 2 miles from your house. She's being brought in now." "And Mr. Bennett?" "She wasn't alone. The man was with her, guy named Trevor Walsh. We're bringing him in too." Richard felt something cold settle in his chest. What happens now? Now we ask questions. Now we find out exactly what they were planning. And now you wait while we build a case. Officer Davis put a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing. That drink would have killed you, I'm almost certain of it. Your housekeeper saved your life today." Richard knew that. He'd known it the moment Maria had stopped him from taking that first sip, but hearing it stated so plainly, so factually, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. His wife had tried to murder him, and in a few minutes, she'd walk through the doors of this police station. And he'd have to look her in the eye knowing that truth. He'd have to face the woman he'd shared his life with and see her for what she really was. The waiting was the worst part. Richard sat in that room, watching the clock, listening to voices in the hallway. Knowing that everything was about to change forever, Catherine walked into the police station flanked by 2 officers. Through the small window in the interview room door, Richard watched his wife of 9 years scan the building with confusion and growing fear. She was still wearing the expensive dress from earlier. Her makeup still perfect, but her confident stride had turned uncertain. She hadn't seen him yet. Officer Davis had positioned Richard where he could observe without being seen. Patricia stood beside him, her hand on his arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. "Mrs. Bennett, this way, please," Officer Davis said, guiding Catherine into an interview room across the hall. Trevor Walsh was being taken to a different room, handcuffed, looking significantly less composed than Catherine. He was younger than Richard had imagined, maybe 35, with the kind of practiced charm that came from years of getting by on his looks. "I don't understand," Catherine was saying, her voice carrying through the hallway. "Why am I here? What's this about?" "We just need to ask you a few questions, Mrs. Bennett. Please have a seat." Richard couldn't see into the room anymore, but he could hear everything through the speaker system Officer Davis had turned on. Patricia had advised him not to watch, not to listen, but he couldn't look away. He needed to understand. He needed to know why the interview started simply enough. Officer Davis asked Catherine about her day, her schedule, where she'd been. She answered smoothly, confidently. Yes, she'd been out with a friend. Yes, they'd had dinner at Bella Veda. No, she didn't see why any of this mattered. "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell me about the smoothie you made this morning?" There was a pause. Richard could picture her face, that slight hesitation before she answered. "Smoothie? I make my husband smoothies sometimes. He works so hard, I like to take care of him." "What did you put in today's smoothie?" "The usual things. Fruit, protein powder, some vitamins." "Why are you asking me about a smoothie?" Officer Davis opened a folder. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband never drank that smoothie. And when we tested it, we found it contained a dangerous amount of prescription sedatives. Enough to potentially kill someone, especially someone taking blood pressure medication like your husband does." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard held his breath, waiting for her response, waiting for her to deny it, to act shocked, to do something that would make sense. "I don't know what you're talking about," Catherine said finally, her voice shaking. "That's impossible. I would never. We have a witness who saw you add something to that drink from an unmarked container. We have the smoothie itself, which has been tested by our lab. And we have your phone, which we're currently getting a warrant to search. So I'm going to ask you again, what did you put in that smoothie?" "I want a lawyer," Catherine said, and her voice had changed completely. Gone was the confusion, the innocent act. She sounded cold now, calculating. "I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer." Officer Davis nodded, as if he'd expected this. "That's your right. But Mrs. Bennett, before I step out, you should know that we also brought in Trevor Walsh, and Mr. Walsh is in the next room right now, and he's very interested in cooperating with us." Richard saw Patricia nod approvingly at this tactic. It was a classic interrogation move, make each suspect think the other was about to betray them. "I don't know who that is," Catherine said, but her voice wavered. "Really? Because Mr. Walsh knows you quite well? He's been very forthcoming about your relationship. Very forthcoming about a lot of things, actually." Officer Davis left the room, letting Catherine sit with that information. He walked over to where Richard and Patricia were standing. "She's going to lay her up, which is smart on her part. But we've got enough to hold her. The smoothie, the witness testimony, the affair. And if Walsh talks, this case gets a lot easier. Is he talking?" Patricia asked. "Working on it. He's scared. Guy's got a record fraud, identity theft, served 2 years about 5 years ago. He knows how this works, and he knows his best chance is to cooperate. Richard felt numb. His wife was a few rooms away, sitting in an interrogation room, being questioned about trying to kill him. And her boyfriend was a convicted criminal. How had he missed all of this? How had he been so blind? An hour passed. Catherine's lawyer arrived, an expensive-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. He went into the room with Catherine, and they spoke in hushed voices. Through the speaker, Richard could hear fragments of their conversation. "Don't say anything. They can't prove. Just circumstantial. But then, officer." Chion emerged from Trevor's interview room with a different expression on his face. He motioned for Officer Davis to join him, and they spoke quietly in the hallway. Richard saw Davis's eyebrows raise, saw him glance toward Catherine's room. Then toward Richard. Officer Davis walked over to Richard and Patricia. "Mr. Bennett, Trevor Walsh is cooperating. He's given us a full statement. It's not good? You might want to sit down for this." Richard remained standing. "Just tell me." "According to Walsh, this has been planned for about 4 months. He and your wife met at a gym about 6 months ago, started an affair shortly after. Walsh has significant debts, gambling mostly. Your wife convinced him that if you were out of the picture, she'd inherit everything and they could be together. They researched ways to make it look like a natural death, something that couldn't be traced back to them." Patricia's hand tightened on Richard's arm. He felt like the floor was falling away beneath him. Officer Davis continued, "The sedatives were your wife's idea. She knew about your blood pressure medication, knew that the combination could cause cardiac arrest. The plan was for it to happen today, while you were supposedly alone in the house. She'd come home late, find you, call 911, a tragic accident, a man who worked too hard and had a bad reaction to some supplements. And the smoothie?" Richard's voice came out as a whisper. "That was her insurance policy. She wanted you relaxed, drowsy, so you wouldn't notice any symptoms until it was too late. Walsh says they were going to wait a few months after your death, let things settle down, then eventually get married. Your life insurance alone was worth $2 million. $2 million. That's what his life was worth to her." Richard felt sick. "There's more," Officer Davis said. Walsh recorded some of their conversations, saved text messages. He was nervous about the plan, wanted insurance in case things went wrong. "We've got your wife on tape discussing the dosage, the timing, what story she'd tell the police. Mr. Bennett, this isn't attempted murder. This is premeditated, carefully planned. The DA is going to prosecute this aggressively." Patricia spoke up. "What about Walsh? What's his deal?" "He testifies against Mrs. Bennett, provides all evidence, pleads guilty to conspiracy and lesser charges. He's looking at probably 10 to 15 years instead of life. Mrs. Bennett, on the other hand, she's going to trial for attempted first-degree murder." Richard walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting everything in orange and red. This morning he'd woken up thinking his biggest problem was a difficult business deal. Now his wife was being charged with trying to murder him for insurance money. "Can I see her?" Richard asked suddenly. "Richard, I don't think that's a good idea," Patricia said quickly. I need to look her in the eye. I need to know if there's any part of the woman I married still in there." Officer Davis exchanged glances with Patricia, then nodded slowly. 5 minutes, supervised, and Mr. Bennett? "Don't expect closure. People like this, they don't usually give you what you need." They led him to the interview room. Catherine sat at the table with her lawyer, and when the door opened and she saw Richard, her face went white. For just a moment, he saw fear there. Real, genuine fear. "Richard," she started, but he held up his hand. 9 years, he said quietly. "We were married for 9 years. We have problems, sure, but I never imagined you could do something like this. Why didn't you just divorce me? You would have gotten plenty in the settlement." Catherine stared at the table. Her lawyer whispered something to her, probably telling her not to engage, but she ignored him. When she looked up at Richard, her eyes were cold. "A settlement isn't the same as everything," she said simply. "And I was tired of waiting for you to actually live your life. You were always working, always busy, always choosing your business over me. Trevor made me feel alive again. So you decided to kill me. I decided to move on with my life. You were just too blind to see what was happening right in front of you. There it was. No remorse. No apology. Just cold calculation and blame. Richard looked at this woman, really looked at her, and realized he'd never actually known her at all. 9 years, and he'd been married to a stranger. I hope it was worth it, Richard said. I hope those few months with a con artist were worth throwing away your entire life. Because that's what you've done. You've thrown everything away. He turned to leave, but Catherine spoke again. That maid? That's who told you, wasn't it? Maria. I always knew she was watching, always knew she was too observant. I should have fired her years ago. Richard stopped at the door. Maria saved my life. She risked her job, her security, everything, because she saw you for what you really are. And you know what the difference is between you and her? She has integrity. She has courage. She's worth 10 of you. He walked out of the room without looking back. Behind him, he heard Catherine start to cry, but he didn't care. Those tears weren't for him. They were for herself, for what she'd lost, for the life she'd gambled and lost. Outside the interview room, Patricia was waiting. You okay? No, Richard said honestly. But I will be eventually. Officer Davis approached them with paperwork. Mr. Bennett will need you to come back tomorrow for a formal statement. But for tonight, go home. Or go to a hotel. Get some rest. This is going to be a long process. Richard nodded. He walked out of the police station into the cool evening air, and for the first time all day, he took a deep breath. His marriage was over. His wife was going to prison. His life as he knew it had ended, but he was alive. Thanks to Maria, he was alive, and that meant he had a chance to start over, to build something real, something honest. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was going to be painful and complicated. But at least he'd be walking it instead of lying in a grave while Catherine cashed in his life insurance. Tomorrow he'd start picking up the pieces. Tonight, he just needed to breathe. 3 months had passed since that. Friday afternoon when Maria had stopped Richard from drinking the smoothie. 3 months of lawyers, depositions, court appearances, and media attention. The story had made headlines. Local businessman. Nearly killed by wife's murder plot, and Richard's face had been plastered across newspapers and websites for weeks. He'd moved out of the house immediately. Couldn't bear to sleep in the same bed where Catherine had lain next to him planning his death. The house was on the market now, and he was living in a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was smaller, simpler, and somehow felt more like home than that big house ever had. The trial had been swift. Trevor Walsh's testimony, combined with the recorded conversations, text messages, and that damning smoothie, left little room for doubt. Catherine's lawyer had tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming she'd been manipulated by Walsh, but the jury hadn't bought it. The evidence showed clearly that she'd been the mastermind, the one who'd researched the drugs, calculated the doses, and made the final decision to go through with it. 20-5 years. That's what the judge had given her. She'd be eligible for parole in 15, but by then she'd be in her 50s, and Richard would have hopefully built an entirely new life. Trevor Walsh got 12 years for conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder. His cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, but not by much. Richard sat in his apartment on a Tuesday morning, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the city. He'd sold his company 2 weeks ago. The stress of the trial, combined with the realization that work had consumed his life for so long, had made him reevaluate everything. He'd gotten a fair price, enough to live comfortably and figure out what came next. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Mr. Richard, I made too much pozole. Would you like some? I can bring it by this afternoon. He smiled. Over the past 3 months, Maria had become something more than just his former housekeeper. She'd become a friend. After the arrest, Richard had immediately given her a generous bonus and told her she never had to work another day in her life if she didn't want to. But Maria had refused the idea of retirement. I'm only 53, she'd said. What would I do? Sit at home and watch TV? No, I need to work. But maybe not cleaning houses anymore? That conversation had sparked an idea in Richard's mind. An idea that had grown over the following weeks until it became something real, something purposeful. He texted Maria back, I'd love some. Come by around 2. I want to talk to you about something. At exactly 2 o'clock, Maria arrived with a large container of pozole and homemade tortillas. Richard had set up his small dining table, and they sat together like they'd done several times over the past months, just two people sharing a meal and conversation. How are you doing? Maria asked, as she always did. She had a way of asking that made it clear she wanted a real answer, not just fine. Better, Richard said honestly. Some days are harder than others. I still wake up angry sometimes, wondering how I missed all the signs. But my therapist says that's normal. Maria nodded. She'd encouraged him to see a therapist, had even recommended the one her daughter had seen after her divorce. Anger is normal. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not your fault. I know. I'm working on believing that. He took a bite of the pozole, savoring the rich, complex flavors. This is incredible, as always. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Richard set down his spoon. Maria, I wanted to talk to you about something. You know how you've been looking for different work? Yes, but Mr. Richard, you don't have to find me a job. You've already done so much. Just hear me out, he interrupted gently. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how you saved my life. And I realized something. You saw what was happening because you were there, in the house, paying attention. You noticed things that I was too busy or too blind to see. And I started wondering how many other people are in situations like I was, where something's wrong but nobody's paying attention. Maria watched him carefully. Curious where this was going. So I've started a foundation, Richard continued. It's called the Witness Project. The goal is to support and protect domestic workers, housekeepers, nannies, caregivers, people who work in homes and see things that others don't. I want to create a confidential hotline where they can report concerns about abuse, neglect, or dangerous situations without fear of losing their jobs. Maria's eyes widened. Mr. Richard, that's wonderful. There's more. I want to offer legal protection, job placement assistance, and support for workers who speak up about what they've witnessed. Too many people stay silent because they're afraid, because they need the money, because they think nobody will believe them. I want to change that. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. And I want you to run it. Be the director. You understand this world better than I ever could. You know what these workers face, what they need, what would actually help them. I can provide the funding and the business infrastructure, but you'd be the heart of it. Maria opened the folder, looking at the proposal, the budget, the plans. Her hands trembled slightly. Mr. Richard, I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm just a housekeeper. You're not just anything, Richard said firmly. You're one of the most observant, courageous people I've ever met. You saved my life, Maria. You risk everything to do the right thing. That's exactly the kind of person who should be leading this. Tears filled Maria's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. We can start small, hire people to help with the things you're not familiar with. I'm not asking you to do this alone. But I am asking you to be the face of it, the voice of it. Because when domestic workers see you, they'll see someone who understands them. Maria wiped her eyes with a napkin. My whole life I've been invisible. That's what we're supposed to be, you know? We come in, we clean, we leave, and nobody really sees us. But you're saying you want me to be visible, to speak up, to matter. You've always mattered, Richard said quietly. I just failed to see it for too long. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't underestimate yourself. They talked for hours that afternoon. Maria asked questions, raised concerns, but Richard could see the spark in her eyes, the excitement building despite her nervousness. By the time she left, she'd agreed to at least meet with the team Richard was putting together, to see if this was something she could really do, 2 weeks later, the Witness Project officially launched. The press conference was small but well attended. Richard spoke briefly about his experience, about how Maria's courage had saved his life. But he made sure the focus was on her and on the mission of the foundation. When it was Maria's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone nervously. She'd practiced her speech a dozen times, but Richard could see her hands shaking. "My name is Maria Rodriguez," she began, her voice quiet but growing stronger. "For 28 years, I've cleaned houses. I've taken care of other people's homes, their children, their lives. And for most of that time, I was invisible. People talked around me like I wasn't there. They left private documents on desks, had arguments in front of me, lived their lives as if I didn't exist." She paused, gathering courage. "But I did exist. I do exist. And I see things. All of us who work in other people's homes, we see things. We see when something's wrong, when someone's in danger, when a child is being neglected or an elderly person is being mistreated. We see it, and most of the time, we stay silent because we're afraid her voice grew stronger now. The Witness Project is for everyone who's ever seen something wrong and been too scared to speak up. We're here to protect you, to support you, to make sure that doing the right thing doesn't cost you everything. Because nobody should have to choose between their conscience and their livelihood." The room erupted in applause. Richard watched Maria, saw the way she stood taller, saw the transformation happening in real time. This woman who'd spent decades making herself invisible was now stepping into the light, and she was magnificent. Over the following months, the foundation grew. They hired staff, set up the hotline, and began working with legal advocates and social workers. Stories started coming in: a nanny who reported child abuse, a caregiver who exposed financial exploitation of an elderly client, a housekeeper who helped police uncover a domestic violence situation. Each time, the Witness Project provided support, protection, and resources. Maria turned out to be a natural leader. She understood the workers who called the hotline because she'd been one of them. She knew their fears, their struggles, their hopes, and she fought for them with the same fierce courage she'd shown when she stopped Richard from drinking that SMOOTA. 6 months after the foundation launched, Richard and Maria sat in the foundation's small office, reviewing the latest numbers. They'd helped 43 domestic workers report serious concerns, and in 38 cases their intervention had led to real change arrests, protective services involvement, or workers being safely relocated to better situations. "You were right," Maria said, looking up from the reports. "This is what I was meant to do. All those years of watching, of seeing things, it was preparing me for this."